Thank you. It's really a great honor to be here. I want to begin with talking about what is the essence of soil in terms of life. Hello there, folks. Do you know who or what I am? I'm the geomembrane of the earth. I'm your protective filter, your buffer, your mediator of energy, water, and biogeochemical compounds. I'm your sustainer of productive life, your ultimate sources of elements, and the habitat for most biota. I'm the foundation that supports you, the cradle of your myth, and the dust from which you will return. I am a soil. That really sums up in a way the soil and its power, what it does for humanity. And in this 2015 year of the soil, it's a matter of reality that soil does matter in addressing global issues. It's the answer to important global issues facing the humanity. Food production must be soil-centric. Soil management is essential to saving energy. I want to share with you a couple of other issues facing humanity. Population, for example. Current population of 7.3 billion, destined to be 9.7 billion in 2050, 11.2 billion in 2100. Imagine there will be 2.4 billion guests coming to dinner in another 35 years from now, and we have invited them. Soil degradation. The estimates vary. About 24% of the land area affected, of which water erosion is 1.1 billion hectare, wind erosion 0.6 billion hectare. We have an issue with secondary salinization. 20% of the irrigated land area of about 300 million hectare is affected by secondary salinization. We have issues, of course, with this picture is from Lake Erie, just very close to Toledo, of the algal bloom. The problem of water pollution, primarily attributed to the transport of phosphorus and other elements into waters. The algal bloom is affecting great lakes, Gulf of Mexico, the Chesapeake Bay, the Lake Taihu in China, the Baltic Sea, and many other water resources. We have serious issue of urbanization, the urban ceiling. Already 50% of the population living in urban center, going to be perhaps almost 60 to 70% in 2050. By 2030, the global urban land cover will increase by another 152 million hectare. That's 10% of the cropland area. We have issue of biodiversity. As the human encroachment increases, we are losing species at a very high rate, almost 1,000 to 10,000 species per year, compared to the background loss of only 5 species per year. Deforestation, especially in the tropical regions. We have a rate of deforestation which is in 90s about 8 million hectare, in 2000 about 7.6, and a region equivalent to the size of Sri Lanka is deforested every year. Water resources. Many aquifers, some of them fossil water, are being overmined in several parts of the region. In 2000, 2.3 billion people lived in water-scarce aquifer region. By 2025, 3.5 billion people will be living in the regions which are affected by water scarcity. Several major aquifer, Ogallala in the United States, Indo-Gangetic Plains in South Asia, the North China Plain, losing water as much as 2-meter groundwater drop per year. And of course then the major problem of emission of greenhouse gases, which is a very major anthropogenic factor. We already have lost from the terrestrial biosphere the vegetation and the soil since the beginning of agriculture 10,000 years ago, as much as 486 gigaton, petagram, of carbon to the atmosphere. Soils of the world, the estimates vary. My own estimate is perhaps as much as 80 gigaton of agricultural land have lost carbon pools from the soil. So we have a potential to put back almost 500 gigaton of carbon into the terrestrial biosphere through management of land use conversion, and of course through our adoption of best management practices. The Hubert curve is applied to many resources which are short in supply and follow some kind of peak concept, peak oil, peak phosphorus, peak water. I think it's about the time to think about peak soil. Why soil, which is a known renewable resource over a human time frame, cannot be considered peak? Indeed, it might have already crossed that peak because there are many, many competing uses, not only just agriculture, industrialization, the urbanization, recreational use, the biodiversity issues. Most important, the nature conservancy. We must save soil for nature conservancy because there are many ecosystem services that we really do not yet understand that may come from soil. So peak soil, soils which are extinct, they are endangered. Just like some species of birds and animals can be endangered, there are certainly endangered soils. And I'll show you an example of some of these endangered soils from which, of course, we derive several ecosystem services. Here is an example of an endangered soil, the soil which has become extinct. This particular soil probably has lost almost half a meter of the surface soil over a very large area of the Sahel. It has lost its original characteristics, its original name, nomenclature. It is indeed a very endangered soil. And why it has happened? Because of desperateness. Increase in erosion risks in Africa between 1980s and 2090 are going to be as much as 36% more. World as a whole, 14 to 15% more. Urbanization is an issue which I mentioned, very important. This particular picture just north of New Delhi on the way to Punjab, toward the Pakistan side. Almost large areas of topsoil removed for brick making because there are no stones in the alluvial region and there are no major trees. Now let's look at the urbanization requirement. It takes 40,000 hectares to provide accommodation and infrastructure to 1 million people. Annual increase in population of the world is 75 million per year. 75 million multiplied by 40,000 per million, that's 3 million hectares of prime cropland converted to urban land use. Cities with population more than 10 million are number 28 in 2015, and there'll be 41 by 2030. A city of 10 million people requires 6,000 tons of food a day. Imagine the amount of nutrients coming into the cities every day and not going back to the land where they belong and cause pollution and environmental hazard and health hazard. I think this is where we have to begin to think what is happening to the resilience of the ecosystems. Here is a ball that's going to go through a change in landscape, and as this ball rolls, it has some resilience points. And the resilience point depends on at what point of the threshold can the ball return back to its original state. There are possible states in which the system can still have the same function, which means it has resistance. The resilience capacity can come back through certain of those thresholds. And if the perturbation is moderate, this ball maintains its functionality, and that ball is an example of a soil, and can recover because of its resilience and because of change in land use. If, however, it crosses critical threshold, the soil, for example, that I showed you in the picture, that had gone to the critical threshold, then once this ball begins to go into this, it cannot bounce back. It has lost its resilience. It has changed its color even, changed the character of the soil. And this is called the irreversible degradation. And the example of the soil I showed you from sub-Saharan Africa is gone through irreversible degradation. It has lost its capacity. Therefore, understanding the scientific principles of what are the key soil processes, key soil properties, and what are the threshold values, so that we stop mining it before it crosses the critical threshold of irreversible soil degradation. And then when that happens, of course, there's a regime shift. So in this background, the current land use for agriculture is almost 40% of terrestrial surface for cropland and grazing land. 75% of agricultural land is allocated to raising animals. In some cases, animal can be the only agriculture which can be practiced in that area. 70% of the global freshwater withdrawals are used for irrigation. 30 to 35% of the global greenhouse emissions are attributed directly or indirectly to agriculture. And yet, in spite of all that, 1 in 7 person is food insecure. 2 to 3 in 7 are malnourished. They suffer from hidden hunger. So what's the solution? Many times the solution proposed is, let's expand the area under agriculture. Let's encroach the natural ecosystem, whether it's a forest or whether it's steppes or savanna, whether it's a wetland, let's drain them and cultivate more. I do not agree with that philosophy. I think we must explore other options so we can preserve the nature without exploiting it any further for other reasons, for other purposes. What are the other possibilities? Some people think that we produce quite a lot of food already. Do we need to produce more? Can we somehow reduce waste? Can we increase access to food by addressing poverty, inequality, wars, political instability, the migrant crisis that we are facing, which was mentioned by Dr. Schneider, the improving the distribution of the food, maybe increasing use of plant-based diet, not completely eliminating, but not having 3 meals every day on animal-based diet. Maybe accepting personal responsibility of not taking things for granted. Each one of us is a perpetrator, culprit, as well as victim. Each one of us is responsible. There is nothing too small. There are 7.3 billion of us. If everyone make a very small incremental improvement, it can have a major impact. Therefore, each one of us must accept that responsibility. We must increase productivity from the land which is already allocated for agriculture production. In many cases, Sub-Saharan Africa for sure, I have worked there for 20 years, South Asia, definitely, we can easily double, triple, quadruple the productivity from the existing land by using the technology which is already proven. Why not? Why not use existing resources properly before think about bringing new pristine land under cultivation? Sustainable Development Goal Target 2.4 states that by 2030, we must ensure sustainable food production systems and implement resilient agricultural practices. I want to underscore that word resilient, that increase productivity and production, that help maintain ecosystems, that strengthen capacity for adaptation to climate change, extreme weather, drought, flooding, and other disasters, and that progressively improve land and soil quality. I hope that this development goal accepted by UN in September 25th this year in New York will be implemented to every word stated. Sustainable Development Goal Target 15.3. By the way, there are 17 goals, SDGs, but there are 169 targets. I'm sharing with you only 2 targets. By 2020, combat desertification, restore degraded land and soil, including land by desertification, drought and flood, and strive to achieve a land degradation neutrality, which means if degradation happens someplace, equivalent restoration must happen another place. If we implement these targets between now and 2030, obviously we are not any different than what I just stated, how the agriculture should be. Soil organic carbon can play a very important role in Sustainable Development Goals. I was very pleased to hear some of the program here at IIASA today. It says that enhancement and management of soil organic carbon pool is essential to achieving several of Sustainable Development Goals, and by ensuring that soil quality is used, managed, and restored sustainably. What is the sustainable soil management that on which sustainable development goals and many other things depend? In my opinion, sustainable management means replace whatever is removed. If you remove nutrients, replace them. If you remove the topsoil, make sure it gets restored over time. Respond wisely to what is changed. If we change soil structure, if we change water holding capacity, if we change anything within the soil, it must be responded in a proper way. Predict what will happen from anthropogenic and natural perturbations. Be aware what can happen and be prepared to take care of that. Therefore, what is then sustainable intensification in practical terms? In practical terms, the strategy is to more crops from less land. More crop per drop of water, more crop per unit input of fertilizers and pesticides, more crop per unit of energy, and of course more per unit of carbon emissions. These are the strategies on which the productivity must be increased. And therefore we do not require 40% of the Earth's ice-free land under agricultural production. This is to produce more from less. And we must also use less and waste less. I think those are the points which are important. Here's an example of an experiment I started with my colleague Tony Juo at IITA in Nigeria. This experiment was set up in 1972, and we wanted to compare what happens when a farmer takes the crop residue away after every harvest for whatever reason. In case of the farmers in Africa, the reason was building fences, thatch roofs, using for household cooking and so forth, grazing animals, feeding animals, part of it. So this picture was taken in 1987 when I left the institution, 15 years after. So residue was taken, everything from the front part of the plot, residue was left behind on the land in the back part of the plot. This is what happened to the land. The land in the foreground had the same variety, same fertilizer, 120 kilograms per hectare per year, twice a year. The productivity difference, you can see it what it is. And the reason the soil in the front is devoid of microbial earthworm activity, microbial activity, even the termites, centipedes, millipedes, they had no food. So that crop residue was needed for soil biota. Soil animal that live there, because soil biota is the bio-engine of the earth. So when you take away the crop residue, for example, cellulosic ethanol production, it's very important to realize that there is no such thing as a free biofuel from crop residue. You pay a very, very heavy price. I wasn't sure whether a similar thing will happen in a nice climate such as Coshocton, Ohio. So we set up an experiment in 2004 on plots which had been no-till since 1960s. In 2012, 8 years after we established the plots in Ohio, Midwest United States had a serious drought, and we had a low rainfall, almost 50% of the normal rainfall. My student, Josh, is 6'4", and here is a plot from which the crop residue was removed. 2 meters away is a plot from which the residue was left behind. The difference in productivity was 60%. When people talk about climate resilience agriculture, this is what it is. Maintain the biomass on the land surface, provided for activity of the biota which keep the soil alive, conserve water against evaporation and runoff loss. It does not require any further basic that mimic the nature, how nature preserves the crop residue and biomass left on this. So impact of microbial biomass, which is important by crop residue maintenance, is also important to soil organic carbon accumulation. Microbial physiology, in fact, can accumulate soil organic carbon even with lower input of biomass carbon. Transformation of biomass carbon into microbial biomass may be an effective strategy for building soil organic carbon. The work very recently published by Dr. Kallenbosch and his colleagues. So there is a question at the COP20 coming up, COP21 in Paris, that what kind of climate scenarios we want. This is the desired path of carbon dioxide emission for 2 degrees centigrade that G7 agreed at Lucky Law Award. That means we must reduce emissions from 2015 onward, beginning right now. This would be 3.5 degrees centigrade, current national commitment. National commitment already received from different governments for the COP21. And the business as usual will give us 4.5 degrees centigrade. The question is, French government and the chairman of the COP21, will they be able to convince the members of the UN Council who have a voting right to follow the lower path of 2 degrees centigrade climate change by putting carbon back in the terrestrial biosphere, both vegetation and soil? So what is this biosequestration then, which hopefully the COP21 is being requested to vote and adopt? Only 0.05% of 3800 zettajoule, that is 10 to the 21, of solar energy is absorbed annually as gross primary productivity. Gross primary productivity of the Earth, which absorbs only 0.05% of the solar energy, is 123 gigaton of carbon per year. The net primary productivity, after we heard today, this afternoon, soil respiration part, is 63 gigaton of carbon per year. And if you take care of the losses by fire and others, which California and Western US had quite a serious problem, we are left only with about 10 gigaton per year of net ecosystem productivity. The net biome productivity, taking all losses from the system out of 123, is 3 gigaton of carbon per year. So if there is a way to manage that 63 gigaton of net primary productivity, which is already about 6 times the fossil fuel plus combustion plus land use, that is quite an important availability of carbon that we can work with. And if we can do what plants do, if we control what plants do with carbon, the fate of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is indeed in our hands. So here lies the solution. And one of the examples we heard from colleagues at IIASA today exactly on that point. So the question is, how do you implement this, that the global soil carbon pool can be managed? Now that is the snapshot of the global primary productivity. But let's look at the soil carbon pool. To 0.3 meter depth, soils of the world contain organic carbon 700 gigaton, inorganic carbon 234 gigaton, total about a billion, 938 million or a billion gigaton. To 1 meter depth, 1500 gigaton. That was another question we were asking. The Russian figure today given was, I think, 359. So 1500 gigaton for the world. Inorganic carbon 722, total about 2200. 2 meter depth, the total is about 5000 gigaton. If you put into this the frozen soil, the permafrost soil, the figure recent estimate, again coming from German colleagues, Junkunst and others, another 1500. So we have about 6000 gigaton of carbon pool in soils of the world to 2 to 3 meter depth. French government is proposing, let's increase this by 0.04% per year. If you go up to 2 meter depth, certainly you can negate it. I think I'll come back to it in a moment. Probably increasing 0.04% per year is not technically possible. But I'll come to that point. But what it shows is that the carbon cycle has a very close coupled cycling with water, with nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And this coupled cycling of water, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur must be understood at landscape level, because it is this understanding of the coupling of this cycle which really creates many ecosystem services, including carbon sequestration. In fact, we were discussing today with Professor Glatzel, you cannot sequester carbon without also understanding water, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. They go together. And their going together is indicated here. Here is a crop residue. You want to put it back on the land, as I was showing, is essential for soil moisture conservation, soil quantity. But for it to mitigate climate change, this crop residue must become organic matter. It must be transformed into soil organic carbon. In the previous terminology, we used to call it humus. This transformation of carbon in the biomass requires additional nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Why it requires this? Because carbon to nitrogen ratio in a residue is 100. In humus, it's 12. The carbon to phosphorus ratio in residue is 200. In humus, is about 50. Carbon to sulfur ratio in residue is 500. In humus is 70. Humus is enriched with nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. They have to come from somewhere. And if you do not have those nutrients and you have only crop residue, biomass carbon, it will not become humus, which means it will not be stabilized, which means it will go respire back, like the soil respiration data that we were given today for the European work that IIASA is doing. So those nutrients are required. And these nutrients have a cost. Somebody has to pay for them. Therefore, when I was listening to the cost of $100 tax on emissions or on sequestration, we need to know not the economic value of carbon, but the societal value of carbon. And there's a difference between the two. Economic value depends on demand and supply. Societal value depends on the inherent value of that substance. And the societal value, to my luck in looking at the carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and water, is about $120 a ton of C, not of CO2. $120 a ton of C means the CO2 value you've got to multiply by 3.8. So that's the real value. And somebody, if the French proposal goes through, then the farming community must be compensated for the societal value of carbon that we expect them to sequester, and not anything less. Now, to do that, we also have to have a good science. And the good science tells me that the atmospheric pool of carbon at the moment is between 800 and 840 gigaton. It's increasing about 4 to 4.5 per year. It's increasing because we are burning fossil fuel about 10 gigaton per year. We're also deforesting about 1 gigaton per year. That 120 arrow going this way obviously indicates the deforestation, the gross primary productivity that I talked about. Then the plant respiration, and then some of the material goes back into the soil, and then the soil has about 4,000 peta without the permafrost data that I showed you previous slide, and that is soil respiration. And so we have to take care of the difference between the two and find out how much accelerated soil erosion contributes emission, which at this present moment nobody is really worried about, the loss of carbon by soil erosion and emission in the atmosphere. And some of it goes, of course, into the ocean, which is the largest reservoir. And the ocean also sequesters carbon at the moment about 2.3 gigaton. And we can calculate the mean residence time of this on a global scale. This is the global scale. Or you can calculate on a national scale, Austria, Germany, France, India, China, and so forth. Or you can calculate at a plot scale. But the fact is, we do need data, experimental data, to validate some of the models, for example, that we saw this afternoon. So now let's talk about the same diagram, and let's look at a plot scale. Now in a plot scale, you begin with a relative carbon pool. On the y-axis, you have a time on x-axis, and the carbon pool drops about 50% after converting land from forest or steppes or prairie to agricultural system, and the erosion keeps on depleting it more. But if the erosion is controlled, it reaches a steady state after probably about 50 years in a temperate climate, in about 10 years in a tropical climate such as Nigeria, where I worked, within 10 years, it comes down to 50%. And at this point in time, it reaches another equilibrium. Supposing we adopt a recommended management practice, such as leaving the crop residue, the carbon concentration in soil will go up over time until it reaches another equilibrium. And this another equilibrium is called attainable potential. You can reach higher level. And attainable potential is about 2/3 of what the original loss we had. And at this point, if we adopt another technology, improved technology, maybe cover cropping, maybe integrated nutrient management, maybe biochar, perhaps we can reach the maximum potential. And what is the maximum potential? It is the original level. It came to the original level. So the difference between maximum potential and where we started is the sink capacity. So for us to determine sink capacity of a soil, we are talking about Nepal possibility today. This is how it is done. Now at this point in some soils, such as the soil of acid savanna in South America, cerrados, llanos, maybe pampas, or maybe soils which had some deficiency like phosphorus, deficiency, aluminum toxicity, maybe lack of water, we can technically go in soil carbon pool beyond the original level. It is possible in some soil, not all soil, definitely not in Ohio soil, which are very young. So we have to calculate experimentally the slope of this line, delta y over delta x. My center does that on a regional basis as well as on an international basis. This slope or line is the rate of soil carbon sequestration. We can model it by EPIC or by ROTC or by many other models, but I think we must validate them with real world data, and that is required. So there are several things. This gives you sink capacity. You can calculate mean residence time by pool over flux knowing. This can be done on a plot scale, or on a landscape scale, or on a farm scale, maybe on a regional scale. And then we have to find out what are the practices that can lead to carbon that increase. Those practices vary from place to place. We have 300,000 soil series in the world. There is no way that one practice can work everywhere. There's no single bullet. There's no silver bullet. There is no panacea. They vary from place to place. To expect that one technique will work everywhere is not possible. General principle can work. Conservation agriculture is one, biochar, agroforestry. Dr. Reinhard Huttel does a lot of work on agroforestry, desertification control, afforestation, pasture management, water harvesting, drip sub-irrigation, integrated farming systems, the interconnectivity, the nexus approach that German program came up with. UNU Flores has that in Dresden. But one thing that we forget, which is very important to remember, that each of these activities has their own carbon and water footprint. So if we are adding biochar or manure, you want to make sure that the gain in the carbon in that particular soil exceeds what you added. If you brought biochar from somewhere else and add into that and think that's a carbon sequestration, not correct. But if the improvement in soil quality by that adds additional carbon, that additional part is the sequestration. So finding that carbon and water footprint of each of those is very critically important. Now, coming back to the policy issues, humans have not had to deal with such a drastic climate change since 10 to 12 millennia ago. Now the humans with a population of 73 to 77.3 billion, 7 decimal place missing, and projected to be 11 billion, have to deal with it, and increasingly so in the future. And therefore there are very high expectations, especially for somebody like me, on the COP21 in Paris in December 21. There the policy maker, I hope, will not go with the idea, look at me, I'm the largest democracy, I'm the oldest democracy, I'm the largest power and I'm less power and I have a large land. They have to go that we are all citizens of this planet and we are all responsible for taking care of it. Only that will show me the visionary leadership that you are visiting, looking at beyond your own voting constituency. You're looking at the planet Earth as a whole. And that, I hope, will happen. Mr. Lafol, seated here in the center, with his advisors came to see me in my laboratory about discussion on what could be presented at COP21 in Paris. I was very impressed. Here is a policymaker, an elected official of G7 countries, willing to stick his neck out and say agriculture is a solution, not a problem, a solution to the problem of climate change while also providing food for 7.3 billion people. And I think this is offsetting by soil carbon. And here is my calculation, which I haven't yet, the Jean-Francois Susanna's paper yet. I know I received it today. But here is my calculation. You take 30 centimeter depth data. I think that is where the plowing and root growth and crop activity, and this is exactly from that table, which is 704 gigaton to 30 centimeter depth on the world soils as a whole. And if Mr. Laffolle says that I want to have a policy of increasing this carbon by 0.4% per year, 700 times 0.4 gives you 2.8 gigaton. That is approximate the calculation I have done independently for each of the global ecosystems. This 2.8 gigaton, by the way, translated roughly into 1.5 parts per million of CO2 drawdown from the atmosphere. Will that solve the problem of climate change? No. Should it be done? Absolutely yes. Because over a period of time, this is the right direction to go. But I think Mr. Laffolle thinks that if we can increase to 2 meter depth, then we can solve the problem. That is correct. But if is a capital I. Can it be done over a short period of time? I really think it's a great idea, but really there are challenges. What are the challenges? I would like to state in 10 basic laws of soil management. The law number 1, causes of soil degradation. The biophysical process of soil degradation is driven by economic, social, and political forces. We know how to control erosion, but we do not have the policy matters in our hand. The scientists do not. The vulnerability to degradation depends on how rather than what is grown, how you grow it. Remember those slides from crop residue that I showed you from Nigeria and Ohio. By the way, similar slides are from Mexico and Brazil, which I did not share with you. Soil stewardship and human suffering. We talked about soil stewardship, and I'm going to come. When people are poverty-stricken, desperate, and starving, they pass on their suffering to the land. You try to tell a hungry people, have a stewardship, and you know what answer you're going to get. You try to tell a family who's had no fuel to cook food, say, don't cut that tree, they will not listen. We must take care of the basic needs of the community before we can expect the desperate stewardship. It is not possible to take more out of a soil than what is put in it without degrading its quality. That is soil mining. It is soil mining problem that has led to the bypassing of the green revolution in sub-Saharan Africa. We must not keep mining. Only by replacing what is taken can a soil be kept fertile, productive, and responsive to management. The law number 4, marginality principle. I'm not an economist, but I very strongly believe in this. Marginal soils cultivated with marginal inputs produce marginal yields and support marginal living. Good soils cultivated with good science produce good yields and support good living. And this is why we must cultivate the best and save the rest for nature conservancy. That's the reason for it. It's a very important concept. We must. The law number 5, the debate between organic and inorganic. It's a very nice debate. It's very good in Europe. It's very well. I've attended many of the meetings. But please remember, plants cannot differentiate the nitrate and phosphate coming from fertilizers or from manure. It's really a question of logistics. On a 1,500 million hectare, can we put 10 tons of manure every year? Can we transport? If we can, that's the best way to do it. If not, we must adopt the policy of integrated nutrient management. Integrated means try to do everything best you can. The strategy is to produce more from less, as I mentioned. But law number 6, soil carbon. Mining carbon has the same effect on global warming, whether it is through mineralization of soil organic matter, extractive farming, burning fossil fuel, or draining peat soils. Climate is a common property. It really has no differentiation with them, and soil can be either a source or sink of gases, depends on how you manage them. Law number 7, soil versus germplasm. What's more important? The potential of even elite varieties, the GMOs, can never be realized if they are grown under poor soil conditions. It's not possible. Even the elite varieties cannot extract water and nutrients from a rock where they do not exist. That would be a miracle. So we must supply them before they can be absorbed by anything else. Soil are integral to any strategy of mitigating global warming. We have been saying this for the last 20 years. Finally, somebody like Mr. Lafol has accepted it. Klaus Tuffer had also really accepted that. I think we need people like Klaus Tuffer and Minister Lafol, more of those politicians who will listen to science. Sustainable management of soil is the engine of economic development, political stability, and transformation, especially of communities in developing countries. And law number 10, the traditional knowledge versus modern. Sustainable management of soil implies building upon traditional knowledge, but yet using modern science. It is not possible to cure modern diseases with yesterday's medicine. I think that's a very important, but do not throw away yesterday's medicine, build upon it, build upon the traditional knowledge. I think I would like to show in the context of the current migration crisis, let's look at the security issue on x-axis, whether it's political, economic, social, environmental. Let's look at on the y-axis human security, the societal security, the national, regional security, international, global security. If you really plot a graph of it, at the center of it, the pivotal point is the soil and its quality. And it is the soil security that determines water security, energy security, climate security, food security, health and nutritional security, environment security, political security, and of course the international security. The current migration crisis, as was mentioned, really stems from the problem that the soils were taken for granted and not looked after. Many previous extinct civilizations did the same thing. Today we had a very good discussion at lunchtime at Boku University, and I promised that I'll talk about how different religions had considered soil. Begin with Judaism. The word homo is derived from the Latin word humus, or the decomposed organic matter in soil, which is the essence of all terrestrial life. The Hebrew phrase tikkun olam means repairing or restoring the soils of the world. Hinduism, human body is made of kushiti. The phrase is kushiti jal pavak gagan samira, panch tattva adam sharira, but the body is made of soil, water, energy, space, and air. That's Prasanna Upanishad. The Sikhism, the religion of Punjabis, Pavan Guru Pani Pita Mata Dharta Mehat. Pavan, wind, is the Guru. Guru, you understand, the teacher. Pani is the water, Mata, water is the mother. Dharat, land, is the mother. Mahat, the great mother, is the land. This is the Sikhism, Gurbanis. Very in the 14th century, when the Buddhism, one should not break even the branch of a tree that has given one shelter. The quotation, the Christianity, the word Adam, derived from the Hebrew word Adama, meaning earth or soil. Some of you may have your name Adam. Greek, the daughter of earth goddess Gaia, named Thamesis, the goddess of law, and her descendant Demeter was the goddess of agriculture and fertility. Romans, the earth goddess Tellus, there's a journal Tellus, was later the goddess of fertility and harvest, Ceres, and named Matrithera. The Islam, he created the man of clay like the potters. That's Surah Al-Rahman verse 14. We made from water every living thing. Quran 25:54. Do not overuse water even if you are only living on a running river. Prophet Muhammad. And my most favorite is Khalil Gibran. I do not know how many of you know who Khalil Gibran was. He was an American Arab, wrote a book on poetry, and he says trees are poems, rubaiyat in Arabic, Trees are poems that earth writes upon the sky. We fell them down and then turn them into paper so that we may record our emptiness. I do quite a lot of it. I am taking over as a president of IIASA in a year. It will be very difficult for me, those of you know Rainer Hahn, for me to step into his shoes, physically as well as intellectually. He is about 6 feet 8 inches tall and very big. But here is a road, 21st century roadmap of soil science. And I don't think that they are going to give me anything other than perhaps a jeep to look at the sustainable development goals. And this jeep, I hope will have an IUSS license plate, going to look at the soils in the 21st century. And while I'm beginning to drive, my first stop will come, which is an exit 2015 to 2025. And what will soil science do? Sustainable intensification, phytobiome management, disease-suppressive soils through microbiota so that you do not have to put herbicides and pesticides, urban farming, urban agriculture, space agriculture. It's about the time soil scientists got involved in Moon and Mars processes. NASA is doing it, and yet I think we should be doing it much better. Recarbonization of the soil and the biosphere. Very important, and I hope the French government proposal will be coming. The nexus approach, the interconnectiveness of different processes together. And after that, I'll keep going, looking at the soil restoration as a major theme. And as you keep driving in those highway toward the 21st century, you'll come to another stop on the road somewhere which will talk about nutrition-sensitive agriculture. We must take care of the hidden hunger, the 17 micronutrients that affect 2 billion or more humanity. Pharmaceutical products. I met somebody today working on pharmaceutical, the colleague sitting in the front. 95% of all the antibiotics come from soil. We do not want to destroy them. When the animal fed dung, the animal which are fed antibiotics and the dung is put back on agricultural land, you realize what the antibiotics in the dung do to the microbiota. We do not want to kill all the soil organisms. That's why we must save soils for future use, other uses. Soils of extraterrestrial bodies we should study. The soil processes and hypogravity. How does diffusion of nutrients, how does water movement happen under hypogravity condition or zero gravity? The pedological transformation and climate change. Zero emission agriculture. We must come up with agriculture like zero neutrality, zero emission. These are very many challenges, things to be done, but I think that's where the International Union of Soil Science is going to take us. Many things coming up on the horizon, extraterrestrial soils and agriculture, the hypogravity pedology, the sky farming, the climate and soil. Please come and join me on the road tour when I start IUSS. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you.